Hey there, Dungeon Crafters. Ron here, and today I thought I'd just show you a couple quick tips for maybe pimping out your board games a little bit. I've got the miniatures here from Sanctum, and I noticed that, you know, in my video, my box tour video, I talked about how detailed these miniatures were, and I thought it would be cool to apply some washes to these without painting the whole thing and just see how they look just with some of the details popping out on a wash. And I thought I'd show you guys real quick just how to make a couple washes. This is really simple. Real basic miniature painting stuff. We're not going to be obviously doing much more than just making the details pop a little bit, but you can see, if you're not familiar with what a wash is essentially a type of, well, it's pigment added to a medium that allows the pigment to settle into cracks on your model. While it'll cover some of the surface area as well, but it will really make your model pop. It's something that you can do to any model to give it a lot of extra detail with very little amount of work. And I'm going to show you a couple different methods for doing washes today. One is making your own wash and applying it to the model if you've got some paints laying around. And another will be using some pre-made washes. Both are completely viable. This one is made with a wash that I made. It's very light, it's pretty subtle. I may actually rewash this miniature again with a little bit more pigment in the wash just to give it a little more detail. And then here's an example of one that I've done with a Games Workshop wash. And you can see on this is still drying a little bit, but you can see just like the detail really pops when you put a wash on these. It just goes into the cracks and really makes the model come alive. And like I said, this one's still drying a little bit, so some of it's really strong. And it does obviously darken the model, because you're going to be painting the entire model with this wash. As the name implies, you're going to basically wash the entire model in it. But as you can see, the pigment settles into these cracks, and it just makes it very snappy. Yeah, I was really happy with the results on these two, so I thought I'd just show you really quick a couple ways to do that. So the first method is pretty straightforward. We're going to be using some Citadel washes, which are made by Games Workshop. Now, I'm a bit of I'm a hobbyist painter. I don't paint at a super high level. I paint at a tabletop, quality level, just trying to make things a little more immersive. Generally, I'm going to be doing like a cool miniature for a D&D session, or potentially if I really like a board game, I'll paint them. But the problem with board game miniatures is there's usually a ton of them. Now Sanctum's great because there's only a few, and they're pre-colored, so applying washes that go well with those colors actually is going to be a really easy way to get a lot of bang for your buck. I use mostly Reaper paints, but Citadel washes are, in my opinion, the best washes there are on the market. They are expensive. You're going to be paying for that quality, but it's worth it. And there's lots of different colors. So this guy here, the Huntress, was washed in Athonian Camo Shade, which is like a green wash. It's really good for green miniatures. Sorry, we're not focusing here. It's a really good wash for green miniatures. And then, like I said, this guy I actually did my own wash. I'll show you how to do that later. But first we're going to do Agrax Earth Shade here, which is like a brown. It's kind of a dark brown wash, and I'm going to show you how this wash will go on to the Outlaw here, and how it will it'll darken the miniature overall, but how it will immediately start to make these details pop. So when you're washing, you're going to want to, if you're using a premixed wash, and by the way, you could do this you could just buy like 5 or 6 of these washes in a bunch of major colors and then be set. You can be set. You need just a black wash, which I'd recommend Nuln Oil from Citadel if you're going to be mostly just doing your gray miniatures. But these miniatures are colored, and it would be fun to do a bunch of maybe really basic base coats on colors like monsters are all red, heroes are all blue, or something like that in a game with lots of miniatures, and then do these washes. Anyway, so make sure your wash is really nice and shook. Make sure it's shook. And then I just pull them right out of the pot. I don't, some people will dilute them. There are many schools of thought when it comes to painting. I am not the expert. I'm very much an everyman painter. I just paint to get a nice tabletop quality. I'm not going to win any awards. But with these, I think they're very well mixed, and they're great right out of the pot on the washes. On the paints, you want to probably dilute. You always want to thin your paints. But we're not getting into that yet. For a brush, just get kind of a junky brush. You don't want to use a nice brush for this because you're just going to be kind of jabbing it all over the model. It's going to be kind of hard on your brush, so I wouldn't use a fancy brush for this. This is just I got this out of an army painter brush set. It was like maybe $10 for 4 or 5 brushes at different levels or sizes. I believe this is a number 2. And yeah, let's add some wash to this and see what happens. So I'm gonna try to get this so it's in focus while I'm doing this, and hopefully it will just stay there and you can kind of see. Now I'm not gonna make you watch me do this whole thing, but we'll just see what happens here. So get your brush loaded up. You want lots of wash on there. You're just gonna be basically just dragging your brush over the entire model. Maybe what I'll do to keep it doing this kind of live here. Maybe what I'll do to keep it in focus is we'll turn the autofocus off. So get your brush loaded up and then just start dragging it across the miniature. And the pigment, because it's heavier than the medium, will start to just drift into the cracks basically automatically. And you can see even just a little bit of this on this model is going to start making all of these cool details start to really pop. This is a fairly dark wash, so it is going to bring the mini down quite a bit in terms of overall color. Like, it's definitely going to shade the whole miniature. Looks like I might have just a little bit of water on my brush as it's kind of causing the paint to act kind of funny, or the medium wash to act a little funny here. Let me just make sure that I'm good and dry. And all you're going to want to do is just get this whole thing coated with this wash. You're just going to want to go over the whole model and make sure that you get this wash on all of it. And it's going to bring down, like I said, it's going to bring it down a little bit in terms of the overall shade of the model. You know, it'll make it a little darker. Now, typically washing is kind of like the second step of the painting process. You're going to do like a base coat, and then you're going to go over the whole miniature with a wash, and then after you do the whole miniature with a wash is when you start doing all your highlights, your medium lights and then your highlights and stuff like that. We're not going to do any of that. We're just going to wash the miniature, and then we're going to call it done. And like I said, takes a little time. You know, sit down, get some good music going, put on a YouTube video of your favorite board game YouTuber. I do a lot of rolling solo, one-stop co-op shop. I really enjoy just putting on board gaming related content and just getting lost in the process of getting a miniature all nice and painted up. So you get the basic idea. You're just going to go over this whole thing with your brush, trying to get all that stuff. And then once you've got like your first kind of coat, I'm obviously not done, but just to show you, you want to get your brush nice and dry, wash it, dry it off. And then with the brush completely dry, you can go back over the model and kind of back over some of the areas, and it will pick up excess wash. So, there's lots of pooling that's happening here, you can see, and then you just want to dry your brush off every once in a while and continue to kind of pull your brush over the model, picking up a lot of that excess wash, so that it just settles in the cracks and the whole thing. You don't want these big pools. Like, see how I've got these big pools here. I don't really want the wash to be doing that on the miniature, because then it's just going to dry and it's going to look like this big blotchy mess. And so we'll just keep going over that with the brush, kind of picking up the excess, drying it off occasionally, actually fairly frequently drying it off to make sure that you're not just moving globs of paint all over the miniature, but you're actually picking it up for the most part. And like I said, since we're not painting the whole miniature, we're just going to be, like with different colors, we're just going to be washing the entire mini face and everything, just to make sure we get this wash in all the areas. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this mini, and then we'll come back when it's all done, and I'll show you kind of what it looks like once it's all finished and dry. So one thing I realized as I was going through this is that actually probably the reason why a lot of this wash is actually pooling on the miniature instead of you know, laying kind of out nicely is because I did not prime the miniature. I'm just painting directly on the plastic, and normally when you're painting miniatures, you're going to want to prime them, you know, with some spray primer or or airbrush or whatever, to kind of get them all primed and ready to actually take paint, get the surface ready to actually take on the paint. With this wash, as I'm going through, I think I'm going to get good. It's going to stick well into the cracks, and that's okay. That's all we really need, and it will bring, you know, it'll tone the mini down a little bit in terms of color, but overall, that's why it's pooling. So what I'm doing here is actually just going through, and I'm not trying to wash the whole mini. I'm trying to focus mostly on where I see details that I want to highlight, or low light, I guess in this case. So making sure to actually push the wash down into the cracks of the miniature, specifically where I want the wash to settle. So for example, let's see what's a good spot to kind of showcase this on. If we did, let's see, I've already done most of these. But like if we look at this this kind of corner of his cloak here that's coming up, there's a little bit of detail there that I think we could potentially highlight by just making sure that we're really pushing some of that wash into those little tiny details to make sure that you can see there's some really neat detail kind of in the edge of the cloak, and then there's like some stitching on his cloak. We want to make sure that some of that dark wash falls into those stitchings, just to give him that little bit of shadow. So depending on, you know, if it's all gray minis, it's a good idea to go ahead and just prime all of them up first with some spray primer or whatever, and then come in here, you'll be able to just wash the whole miniature. I think this is kind of an experiment, and I think it's mostly working okay. You know, it's pooling a little like I mentioned, but overall I'm getting the desired effect, which is pulling out a lot of those details with a nice wash. So I'm pretty happy with this at this point. It's still drying, it's still wet, so I'm gonna let it dry for a little while, which will shrink up some of the paint. You know, some of it will kind of sink down into the wells and stuff, and it'll look pretty different. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this guy aside, and we'll do some more washing on the last character that I've yet to wash, which is the Dancer. And the Dancer is blue, and so I want to do like a nice blue wash. I could do a black wash potentially, but it might make this miniature too dark. And I have discovered that while I really think the miniature sculpts themselves are gorgeous, I'm not a huge fan of the bases, although they do have some nice details, like the Slayer's got a demon that he's standing on, and the Huntress is, you know, on a log and stuff. Like, the detail on these is pretty minimal, and it's not taking the wash as nicely as I'd hoped, but that's okay, you know, it's no big deal. But we're gonna mix up our own wash for this miniature. Mixing up washes, I'm sure I'm gonna make some paint aficionados upset with this. No matter what you do, you know, there's lots of ways to approach painting. It is a mix of science and art for sure. You know, the science here is the chemistry of how do you mix the paints together and get the pigment to the right level so that it sinks. I'm going to be using Reaper Wash Medium, and I'm going to be mixing it with Reaper 9230, which is soft blue. This is a pretty dark blue, and I just want a nice dark color that's going to sink really nicely into the cracks on this miniature. So first we're going to make sure these are nice and shook up. We want them to have you know, especially the paint. You want to get it. Can be pretty violent when you're shaking these up. Make sure that you get them really nice. And then I'm just using, you know, this is basically a dollar store palette. I do have like a wet palette and a few other ways that I do paints, but you don't need any of this fancy stuff. You know, you just need some paint. And if you don't have a wash medium, you can just use water here, and a lot of people do that. A lot of people use water. You can do tons of research on the internet about, you know, what are the different mixing ratios and all that stuff, and I just kind of tend to play it by ear and feel it out. So we're gonna start with a single drop of this soft blue. That was a pretty good amount, to be honest with you. It wasn't really a drop. And then some wash medium, and I'm gonna do 4 drops of this. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think that's gonna be enough. Just looking at it, I'm gonna do Let's do 6. And then we're gonna take our junky brush. Make sure you're still using your junky brush because all this stuff is going to damage your brush, right? Like mixing, you don't wanna mix, you should try to avoid mixing with your high quality brush. This looks like it's still gonna be pretty painty. So I'm actually gonna add a little more wash medium to it. I'm doing 2 more drops. Like I said, I did get quite a bit of paint on my initial pour from the pot itself. So that's starting to it's starting to look a little better. It's still pretty heavy on the pigment. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and grab with my brush. I'm just gonna soak it up, I'm gonna get some water in it, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of water to the mix as well, just to try to thin it out. Whoops, just try to thin it out a little more. You want a really thin paint for this, for your wash. I'm not sure if this is gonna be still too thin, so we might as well, but you know, we can always, or too thick I should say, but let's see if we can get a little on the miniature. We'll put some, you know, in kind of an inconspicuous spot here and just see how it sinks in, if it's sinking in. Now, it's pretty quick to see that what I've got here is still very heavily paint. You know, there's a lot of coverage there I'm getting, so I'm definitely going to need to thin this down more. And it's going to vary paint by paint. It's going to vary by brand. It's going to vary by color. It's going to be vary with how you're creating your wash. So don't get impatient with it. Just take your time. Keep kind of adding to the mix until you get the consistency that you think is going to actually sink into those cracks. And like I said, the nice thing about when you buy a pre-made one, like a Citadel one, is you're going to be skipping this step, right? You don't have to figure this out. One good way to tell is, if this didn't have so much paint on it, it'd be a little easier, but one good way to tell, I think, for a good wash is if you kind of brush up and a lot of that color actually sinks back down. You're starting to see that the medium might stay wet up here, but the pigment itself is falling down. That's kind of what you're looking for. You want that pigment to be heavy enough that it's going to sink into the cracks on the miniature. So let's do a little more testing here. This is looking a lot better. Unfortunately, that one spot is going to be pretty heavy on the paint. Just a little bit of water, pick it up nicely. And then you're just going to kind of do the same thing that you were doing before. You're going to get some wash onto your brush and then just start brushing it over the miniature. And I'm going to try, instead of just trying to wash the whole thing, since once again I don't have a prime on here or anything like that, I haven't primed it anyway or put any primer, I'm just going to try to get a lot of this stuff into the cracks as best as I can. And this is going to change the color of the miniature. And you know, honestly, I could probably stand to put a bit more medium in here, but I think I'm going to be pretty happy with how this looks. The one thing that I'm noticing with this Reaper paint, and I noticed this when I did, let's get this focused in here a little bit. Hopefully that'll work. One thing that I noticed when I was doing my first wash on the Slayer there is that the paint stuck to them really nicely. I didn't have that pooling problem that I had with the Citadel wash, so just feeling it all out, you know. We're gonna learn as we go. So again, just drag the brush over the miniature, and I am gonna go ahead and just do a full coat on this and let that pigment settle into the cracks. I think this is gonna look really cool. This is an interesting, this is a really kind of interesting blue. It's kind of a purpley blue or a periwinkle or something, and the blue that I picked for the wash is obviously it's kind of a green, a blue-green. It's gonna be an interesting, the final product will be interesting. I think it'll look really cool. And since these are board game miniatures, right, the key component here is making sure that you know whose is whose. And the fact that they're nicely sculpted is just a super bonus. Again, these are miniatures from Sanctum, from Czech Games Edition. And we're gonna keep that very easy visibility that, you know, which miniature is which color. But at the same time, they're just gonna look a little snappier on the table, which is cool. Of course, I might go back at some point and actually give these a full paint job, just because they're such nice miniatures. And there's only 4. I only need to do 4 to pimp out the whole game. And normally it's like I did Lord of the Rings, Journeys in Middle Earth. I painted all the miniatures in that, and it took a very long time. Of course, the game looks awesome now on the table. If you guys would be interested in seeing anything about that game, let me know in the comments. Or if there are other crafting things that you'd like to learn about. And like I said, I'm fairly amateur at all this stuff, but I just think it's so fun to kind of do these little things to your games just to make them stand out a little more, give them a little more pizzazz, a little more presence on the table. If you have other ideas for things you'd like to see or anything like that, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep washing this model, and then we'll come back over once it's all finished, okay? Alright, and so this is what it actually looks like when it's all done. I did do just a little bit of black wash on a couple spots just to make it pop out, and I kind of wish I hadn't actually, because I think it actually turned out really good with just the blue. But you can see how the blue, the darker blue, just settles into the cracks on this and just makes those details really sing. And this is just an easy way, like I said, to get, you know, just a little extra pop out of your miniatures without doing a whole lot of extra work. You could of course come back and highlight to really make the cracks even darker, or you know, obviously the next, you know, the next step after doing something like this would be to go and actually fully paint the miniature, probably do a base coat and then wash, maybe a little bit of highlights, and call it good. But I think this is a great way to take miniatures from a tabletop game and just give them a little extra pizzazz without putting in too much work. And your shopping list is really small. I mean, if you want to use pre-made washes, it's as simple as just going and getting, you know, the main colors that you need, a brush, and a little pot for some water and stuff, and you're good to go. And because you're doing washes, you don't even need that high quality of a brush. So here's how the wash that I made turned out. And then here is the one that we did on the Outlaw, which I think, honestly, I think it looks really good. I think it gets a little muddy on the base, maybe a little bit. And like I said, really, I'm trying to do this quickly to just give them a little extra color. But again, it adds this kind of moodiness almost to this miniature with all of this darkness that just kind of makes them look sort of dirty. I think it's the mix of the brown wash and the, you know, kind of yellow tan miniature, but I think it looks good. Here is the Huntress, which is with the Citadel Athonian camo shade, which again just looks awesome, looks great, really gets into details on her breastplate, for example. Some of those swirls really makes that stuff shine. All that stuff would be, you know, is going to be very obvious when you pick up the mini and look at it, but now on the table it's going to have a lot of that same really nice detail. And again, the bases, you know, I don't really like how it turned out on the base. In fact, I might go through here and, you know, use some water or whatever, or to actually pick up some of this pigment, get it off of this base, because I'm just not very happy. It just looks kind of muddy and weird. But on the miniature itself, they almost look like little colored, you know, statues. And then I did do a red wash on the Slayer, but I went back and did Nuln oil on him just to see what he'd kind of look like, and he almost looks like, I mean, I think he looks really cool. This guy is just rich with details. I love this like skull on the hammer. You can see just how detailed kind of his plate armor is and all that other stuff. I just, overall, you know, this really adds a lot of pizzazz to mini. You can't do all of them with this dark wash without a lot of them getting really washed out or kind of muddy maybe, but with this deep red, it really just comes out really nice. So like I said, not too big of a deal here. This is a really simple way to just spruce up your games just a little bit. And you know, to review, if you want to just get the basics going, just go to your hobby shop, find you know, a number 2 brush. Don't spend a ton of money. This is actually a nice brush. This is my junky brush. This was from an army painter set, like I mentioned. Get the Citadel washes that you want. This is the brand I'd recommend if you're gonna be doing this. I just think these washes are great. I think they're like $8 or $12 a pot at this larger pot size, which is pretty expensive, but you know, bite the bullet, grab 5 or 6 of them, and especially Nuln oil. That's gonna be your all-purpose. And then if you want to start getting into making your own washes and other stuff, and then building a collection of actual paint so you can paint your miniatures, which maybe we'll cover at some point in the Dungeon Crafters channel, I can maybe show you how to do kind of a tabletop quality miniature in about an hour. But you can pick up some wash medium and then pick up, you know, some paints. Now I like these Reaper dropper paints. These are a good price to quality value in my opinion. I think they're about $3 a pot. They are sold in 3 color combos, which I think is really cool. Yeah, and then you can create your own washes. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful to you, just as a way to kind of pimp out your games a little bit. I'm going to be doing more stuff like this alongside my gameplay series. As I'm a crafty dude, I like to craft. You might be hearing some noises in the background. It's actually my 3D printer working on some miniatures that I'm printing out for a friend for his board game, and I can maybe show you guys what those look like in another video. But anyway, that's it for dungeon crafting for today. Thanks for watching. Hope you liked it. If you have any questions, leave a comment and let me know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you join the small community we've been building here with Dungeon Crawlers Anonymous. And yeah, anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.